If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Drivers, what's the strangest / creepiest thing you've witnessed while driving at night? A group of teenagers all wore the same exact outfit and masks and stood a few miles apart on a long stretch of road, so when I drove by it looked like I was passing the same guy standing on the side of the road. Very clever, but very creepy. My grandfather stopped driving off big roads after this happened. He hated highways and always took back roads. I was really young and in the back of the truck cab. Suddenly my grandfather slammed the brakes. At the end of what was about to be a sharp L curve was a man drenched in blood cutting up a roadkill deer with a small saw. What freaked my grandfather out was, this man was in dark clothes, so we didn't see him until he was 20 feet away. It was past midnight. He stared at the car for a few seconds before returning to what he was doing. The man's mouth was clearly covered in blood, indicating he has eaten some of the raw deer. My grandfather told me to close my eyes. In case he had to run this guy over, he cracked the window a quarter inch and asked the guy to move. And then I heard my grandmother shriek, saying, "Just go, just go." I looked up and the man was now standing and had what I can only assume was a chunk of deer he was eating like an apple. My grandfather floored at missing the guy by less than a foot. I saw what I still to this day don't really know how to explain when I was driving in BC, British Columbia, back in 2005. It was way too dark out to see anything too clearly, but I remember seeing a very distinct bipedal walk, not across the road but along the road next to my car, who was definitely above 8 feet tall. Didn't remind me of Bigfoot because he wasn't really hunched over or thick in the body. More like a very lanky long character with arms that were skinnier than my own. Also, this thing, was nearly 100 kilometers from the closest town that I'm aware of. I was driving down the interstate at about 4 in the morning and I saw eyes in my headlights in the road ahead of me. I slowed down and stopped to a bunch of geese walking across the road. I turned on my hazards to let them pass, and when they were almost across I saw a flash of light. There was a guy standing next to my truck and he took a picture. I live a couple of blocks away from the only forensic psychiatric hospital in the state. I believe there is an unmarked assisted living facility on my street too, as frequently people with mental disabilities and different quirks complex, and he couldn't have seen which one I entered, or spot me through the small crack in the curtain. I swear he was looking straight at my apartment, at me. Then he began a series of movements. I don't know how to explain it. He walked sideways, but he'd raise his knee very high, then slowly slap it down onto the pavement. Then he'd raise his other knee very high, and do the same thing again. He looked like a marionette puppet, or like he was moving underwater. It didn't look like foot drop, motor disorder, drunken gait, or anything I've seen before. His pale, wet face remained fixated on my apartment window the entire time. He moved so slowly that it must have been 5 minutes before he'd moved past the span of a few houses. Then I realized he was actually slowly starting to move forward. Onto the road. Toward my window. I went to grab my phone, and when I returned to the window he was gone. I imagined him pounding on my door, or climbing my balcony, but nothing happened. Watched for another 5 minutes, and saw a squad car very slowly roll down my street. That happens so rarely in my quiet suburb that I suspect they were looking for him. My boyfriend and I were coming back from a terrible vacation and we were arguing when all of a sudden we see a creature on the expressway. This thing looked like Dobby from Harry Potter. It was walking on 2 legs and crossing a very dangerous area where no one in their right mind would cross, especially in the middle of the night. It basically looked like a troll. We looked at each other like WTF. I'm certain this was not an animal. Needless to say, we got nervous, started laughing, and the fight was over. The little troll guy helped us stop fighting, but it was super creepy. Not me, but this is a story my dad told me about 10 to 15 years ago. In the 5-mile radius by our house, there is a certain intersection where a lot of car accidents have happened. Unfortunately, some of those instances were fatal. My dad worked the later shift at a nearby company, typically from 3 p.m. to 12:30 a.m. To get to work every day, he has to drive past this intersection, and one day when he was coming home after midnight, he stopped at the red light and noticed something odd. There was a woman in a white gown standing next to a bush. Just standing there by herself, with her face down. The light turned green, so he kept going and figured it was just a random occurrence. But the next night, he saw her standing there. And the night after that. And the night after that. And the night after that. At this point, he hadn't told anyone about it, but he was starting to get freaked out and talked to my mom. My mom of course freaks out too and put a religious symbol in his car. After she did that, he drove by the intersection the next night and never saw her again. Now we all have religious symbols in our car, and thankfully I've never seen anything like that. I was on the freeway and saw a car pulled over on the side of the road up ahead. As I got closer, it looked like someone/thing walked behind the car and blocked out the tail lights for just a second as they passed by. Then, the tail lights appeared to completely go out. As I approached where I had seen the car, there was nothing there. When I turned 16 and got my license, a friend and I would go aimlessly driving. We would typically be out until her curfew of 1 a.m. exploring, back before we had GPS to find everything. One night we decided to stop at a drive-thru then head on to our adventure. There is a metro park about 20 minutes from my house. We would walk to park during day hours but never explored surrounding areas. We took the roads behind the main park, following a straight path. At one point we come up to a fork in the road. I asked her which way looked more interesting. We took a right. The road followed an S shape for a few miles. Then we approach a sharp right turn, follow the curve that's going uphill. We're driving along, just talking for about 3 minutes when we realize, we're still headed uphill on this road that's only curved right. We never hit a straight path, no flat area, only up and right. I hit the brakes and asked if we should keep going, check the clock it's almost 1 a.m. So we end our adventure and I drop her off at home. A week later we decide to go check out that road during daylight hours. Maybe we missed a sign somewhere? Follow the same straight path past the park. We never find the fork in the road. We never find that road uphill. Another friend and I checked sometime later. This road does not exist. Not the creepiest thing ever, just a vanishing road. While living in Mons, Belgium, my mom picked me up from a school event on the military base. The drive home consisted of going down a beautiful dark road where fields laid on each side of the road as well and trees that were spaced about 20 feet apart. It was around 11 when we got on this road where we saw something fly from a tree with a wingspan that blacked out our entire windshield for about 3 seconds, and once we could see it simply vanished with no trace at all. We never knew what it might have been, but I remember me and my mom having the same uneasy evil feeling that whatever landed on the hood of our truck wasn't normal. I saw a body on the side of the road once in a pretty unpopulated area. I pulled over and started to get out, but I had a bad feeling that I still can't explain. So I sat there a minute when the man looked over at me and then went back to having his eyes closed. The way a child does when they try tricking you into thinking they're asleep. I locked my doors and started to call the police. Then he got up and took off running. I think he was trying to get someone out of their car. I'm so grateful I listened to my intuition and didn't get out. A couple of years ago I was taking some classes at an extension of a local college. The campus was spread out and had buildings in the town 35 miles from home. One class got out late and usually left me getting home around midnight. This particular night I stopped by Walmart to pick up some groceries because midnight shopping is the best because there is no crowd. It was late January and the weather was extremely cold. The inversion was bad and the fog that settled in was unusually thick. There were patches of clarity that showed that there was no moon that night. I have driven the road a million times and even with the fog could identify my location easily. As I came around a corner the road came up a big hill and then gradually headed south. The road was wide, but was surrounded by a shallow canyon. As I was leaving the canyon, I came into a patch of fog that was so dense that I had to slam on the brakes because I could not see more 10 feet in front of me. The fog caught all the stray light in the area and immediately illuminated everything with a bright orange glow. Suddenly I see something dart in front of my car. It was on hands and feet, but looked like it belonged on its hind legs. Its forelegs were short and covered with dense fur, and its hind legs were too long for it to be something that usually stood on 4 feet. Its hind legs were also covered in dense fur, but it had loose flowing skin. My first thought was that I almost missed hitting a little boy that was playing in the road, except the boy was covered in fur. I stopped the car and watched as the creature ran across the road loping along with very childlike movements. My heart was pounding and I waited to see what it would do next. It padded off the side of the road and climbed up the embankment on the other side. Once atop, it turned and looked at me. It had a cat-like face, but once again looks like a boy in costume or pajamas. It was clearly an animal, but it was so human-like it scared me for weeks after. I looked up images on Google and came to the conclusion it was a juvenile bobcat with some with extremely disproportionate legs, but something about it still unsettled me. A few weeks had passed, and I had forgotten most of it. Driving the same road in similar circumstances, I came upon the same patch of fog. It was so thick it was like someone had dropped a blanket over my car. I slowed to a crawl and looked for the road sign that signaled that I was halfway home. As I drove past it, I noticed a man leaning up against it. He wearing a gas mask from World War II. He looked directly at me and shook his head disapprovingly. I freaked out and picked up speed. I wanted nothing to do with whatever he was there for. Outside of the fog, the night was crystal clear and the moon was full, providing excellent visibility. As I made my way out of it, a few hundred yards later, there was a deafening crack. I instinctively slumped in my seat and thought I had been shot at. But there had been no other cars, no buildings, and no other people around for at least 15 miles. A quick scan of my windows showed no cracks or holes. Panicking because I knew I was so alone, I sped up the car. A second or two later, there was another deafening crack. Then a third, then a fourth. Suddenly, my windshield was cracked with lines through every portion of it except the driver's side. The windshield was only a few months old, and had no chips, bubbles, cracks, or flaws before that night. The next morning, I looked at my windshield. There were obvious impact marks in 4 to 5 places, but it was impossible to know that they came from. After the inversion cleared that winter, I never had another unusual experience on that road, but it still creeps me out to drive it at night in the winter. Not so much creepy as it was scary. My sister and I had day tripped on our family's annual May camping trip. It was around midnight that we were leaving, and we were on a really long winding road at least 40 to 45 miles outside of the closest city, and another 10 from the city we live in. We turned off out of the reservoir camping area onto the main road, and about huge-ass truck was on our tail not even a mile after. I'm going about 60 to 65 already. It was a 50 with turns of about 45 miles per hour, because fuck it, we wanted to get home and the road could handle it. This guy started bridling me and dropping back just to rev his engine and floor it to our tail again. Every time there was a point where he could piss on and off all the way, another 20 to 25 miles, to the nearest town where we pulled off into the closest well-lit gas station. Well, after he pulled that stunt, I didn't go over 55 the entire time to town because I didn't know what he was going to do and wanted to be prepared for anything. He drove past the gas station really slow, like obviously trying to scare us slow. Sister goes inside to pay for gas and some food/drinks, and when she came back, a cruiser had pulled up behind us. Told us that they had a complaint about us brake checking the dude and stuff. He got our story separately, saw how it lined up, looked at my 10-year-old niece and 3-month-old daughter in the backseat, and told us to have a nice night, drive safe, and if we notice him following us again to call 911. We would have earlier, but until the gas station we didn't have cell service. Driving with my sister down an empty road in the middle of Kansas, roughly midnight, the car's headlights catch a big pale animal eating a dead deer by the side of the road. No biggie. 'Tis the season for roadkill venison. At casual glance, I think it's a dog or a coyote, standing at a weird angle. Then its head turns around, and I mean all the way around, and its eyes are huge and shiny. It's an owl, only it's bigger than any owl. I know the human brain has a way of exaggerating what it perceives as a threat, but there was a fence right next to it, which we later, in the daytime, measured at about 4 feet, and that owl was nearly as tall. I know I saw its feet on the ground, but even if I'm wrong and it was standing on the dead deer, that's way too big to be an owl. Then it spread its wings and took off, and for a second, it was stretched out, with a wingspan almost as wide as a 2-lane road. In every other respect, it was a normal-looking owl, just huge. I was taking my GF home and took a right to a very steep road. Street is busy but not a place people walk in, especially at this time, late afternoon. Just at the intersection I saw an SUV drop off a girl no older than 13, she looked really scared and pale, and that was definitely no place to drop someone off. I always wonder what happened there. Also, I was once driving along at 4 a.m., was visiting some family in New Mexico and was leaving. I live some 400 miles away, so I leave really early so I can do stuff during the day. I was driving along and my peripheral vision catches something off. I look to my right and there's what looks like a coyote running along the car. Mind you, I was doing 80 miles per hour. For some reason I felt as it was looking straight at me. It was dark. At this point I freaked the fuck out and pushed the gas. I looked to the road and again to my right, nothing. Then I look in the rearview mirror and it was dark, but I swear there was something standing in 2 legs there. By far the creepiest thing that has ever happened to me. I was driving through a national forest at 1 a.m. and it turned into a safari. First a couple deer crossed the road in front of me. An owl swooped down, head on, grabbed a mouse from the road, and pulled up with an inch of room between him and my windshield. A pack of wild pigs were hanging out on the road and freaked out not knowing where to go. They tried running up the mountainside but couldn't make it, so they zigzagged for a bit and darted off down the mountain. A giant snake was chilling on the asphalt. Hundreds of bats swarmed in the sky. A fox darted across the road. A possum family lazily crossed the street. All of this in the span of 10 minutes. I never saw a forest so alive. Friend and I decided to go off-roading in my Suzuki Samurai one night due to boredom. There was a big thunderstorm that had just passed and everything was drenched. We are driving up the mountain to this local off-road spot. Imagine a 5-mile twisty gravel road. There is one spot where the trees clear and you can see everything around you for miles. As we approach this spot, there appears to be a thick white cloud or fog bank, but it's small, about 50 foot in diameter. I slow down as it is so thick we cannot see through it. The instant we drive into it, everything electrical dies. Headlights, gauges, engine, radio, etc. We both look at each other as I attempt to restart the Samurai, but nothing. At this point it seems like maybe a battery cable came loose, so I get my phone out to use the flashlight. What do you know, it's off too. My friend checks his phone too and it's the same way, dead and won't power up. We are starting to get a little freaked out. Unsure what we should do, we just sit there. About a minute passes and suddenly the fog slowly moves to the left. We couldn't tell this at the time because we are still inside of it blind. The instant the fog cleared us, everything electrical came back to life. The headlights come on, radio starts playing and our phones start powering up. I reach forward and turn the key and it fires up no problem. I back up and see whatever it was we drove into floating off to the left at about walking speed. Still don't know what it is to this day, but it was pretty strange and incredible timing to be a coincidence. I called this into the police about 3 a.m. followed until it ended and they arrived. Woman driving the wrong way down the main 5-lane through the city. Made a hard left off the road across the service road into a parking lot. Got out, walked around a dumpster, got back in and rolled out, wrong way again into a neighborhood, rear-ended a car parked on the street doing about 40. I jumped out and ran to her. She was trying to restart the car. It was totaled, airbag went off, smoke under the hood. I pulled her out. She said she was just driving home when her car overheated, hence the smoke, she said. Turned out she had Alzheimer's and the dumpster was where she fed the neighborhood cats, when she lived in that area years ago. She thought she was back there again. My father, around 20, is driving along with Ray, his best friend, bullshitting. It's around 3 o'clock in the morning, not a soul awake, when all of a sudden a red ball pops out into the road, along with a little 6 to 7-year-old boy. There is absolutely no time to stop. My father and Ray don't even have long enough to brace for impact, when the car plows into the kid. Then through him. When my dad looked in the rearview mirror, the little boy is standing there, looking back at them from the road, smiling. Ray turns and sees the boy as well, asking my father if he saw that too, which he obviously says yes. Turns out, in a neighboring town of where I used to live, New Jersey, there was a tale of that outside of a school. I cannot remember if it was closed down or still open at this time, where a ghost boy will run across the road in front of your car, chasing a red ball. This came about because of a little boy unfortunately dying from chasing his bouncy toy into the street during recess. My father knew of this story but doesn't believe in the paranormal. This was his first experience with anything ghostly and would very openly admit if he was under the influence of drugs or alcohol, which he has admitted to before. I have two. Both from the same area. First, I saw a big cat. I live in Australia. A few years ago I was dating a lady who lived on a farm about 20 minutes out of my town. One night I was driving out there and saw something in the middle of the road ahead of me, so I slowed down. Pretty quickly I realized it was a cat, but I thought it was closer than it was because of its size. It was large and stood about maybe 60 to 70 centimeters tall. It was dark colored, had a large head and had a long tail. It was eating some roadkill and quickly looked into my headlights, then disappeared into the bushes on the side of the road. Without getting out of my car I swung around and flashed my headlights into the bushes, but I couldn't see it. I reported it to the Big Cat Sightings group, but I never saw it again. Secondly, one night around 1130 p.m. I was heading out there when I noticed something ahead on the road. I slowed down. As I got closer I saw it was two people in their 40s wearing all white but dirty clothes and no shoes, just walking along the road. Their eyes had that maddened look about them, and the woman's long blonde grayish hair looked like a bird's nest. I stopped next to them, wound down my window and asked if they were okay, but they seemed oblivious to me and my car. They were staring into the distance and walking. Again I asked if they needed help, as there was nothing around this area. They just kept moving forward at a slow pace. So I moved on. I was worried about them, and about 5 minutes later I decided to go back. They were still walking along the road, fixated on something in the distance. I beeped the horn this time. No reaction. I opened the window again and said, "Where are you going?" Nothing. I told them to get off the road, it's dangerous, and I went to my GFS house. She had no idea who they were, nor had heard anything like it. There are rumors of a cult out that way, so that's my guess of where they'd come from or where they were going. I was driving from Houston to Austin, I-10 to 71, it was close to midnight. I was on the 71 leg, with no other cars in sight until one truck pulled on the highway about a mile ahead. After about 5 minutes or so, the gap was close to about half a mile, and I noticed this guy can't maintain his lane consistently. I decide to call 911 but first need the license plate. I accelerate to about 90 miles per hour. I'm finally in range where I can make out the license plate and notice there's a second car immediately behind me. It came out of nowhere and was right on my bumper. He go there so quick, it legitimately startled me. I was in a new Audi S5, and a portion of my brain said, this is one of those car or insurance traps. Just as I'm about to hit the dial button for 911, the drunk truck in front makes a hard lane change followed by an almost catastrophic overcorrection. Within moments the car behind makes a hard lane change to match the truck, followed by flashing red and blue lights. The car that came out of nowhere was DPS, and my friend saw that too. After that he was dead silent for a good portion of the night. As I said, the thing seemed to follow us for a while and then it put some distance over us and literally fell over the horizon. We live in an island and there's another island with a rocket launching base, so I figured it was either one of the two things, a plane that fell or a rocket that fell. First thing I did when I got home was to spend hours refreshing news websites to see if they had any info on what happened that night. Nothing. I still don't know what it was, but, by definition, we can call it an UFO. I was out jogging, but on the road so it sorta counts. I was in my neighborhood, only a kilometer from home, in a nice subdivision. It was early spring, and about 6 a.m. so it was still dark outside and I was going running before work. I come around a corner and see a silhouette of a car parked along the side of the road. It was unusual because it is an upscale suburban avenue and there's no reason to park on the road. And it was kind of a shitty car and no one there has shitty cars. Then I see a shadow standing beside the car. Absolutely still, which is a weird thing to do at 6 a.m. Then I notice that their arms are straight out, and at a 45-degree angle from their body. As I get closer I can see more details. The moon is silhouetting them for me. It is a woman with long hair, and she is standing there completely naked. At this point my brain is misfiring, not knowing what is going on, and sending danger signals. She didn't appear to be in immediate distress or danger. No third party was around, so I thought it was safe enough for her. Where she had parked the car offered a view out over the lake and the sunrise, so I thought she was having some sort of psychotic episode. I did not want to be found as a middle-aged male, next to a naked lady with a probable mental health crisis. So, I quickly turned around and started running for home, to call 911. But as I approached my house I saw a cop car go whipping past me, down the road I just came from. I assumed the paper delivery van I passed a couple minutes prior had saw the lady and called it in. My husband was driving home around 2:30 a.m. one night. He went down a quiet back road. There are a few small houses that line this road, but it's always super quiet. Well, on this one particular night, my husband managed to drive up to a group of people just scattered standing in the middle of the road. They weren't mingling and talking to each other. He said they looked like zombies just mindlessly standing in the road. He had to honk to get them to notice that he was there and move and that they were in this trance-like state. He said one of the small houses had all of its lights on and music playing, like they were hosting a party there, but the random zombie people in the road really creeped him out. Long time ago I was driving home at night, 1 a.m., through an industrial area in the dead of winter. I noticed a glow up ahead, and as I got closer I realized a large warehouse was on fire. I pulled up to the front of the building, which was totally engulfed in flames, and realized there were no other people around. No cars, no cops, no fire engine. I stood there dumbfounded as the building continued to burn in the silence. This was back before cell phones so I couldn't call 911. I waited in case I heard anyone screaming or running out but no one came out. No cops came, nothing. I waited and watched for a full 20 minutes. Nothing. WTF? Who did this? Finally I drove another 10 minutes to a payphone and called 911. They said thanks for reporting and that was it. It was creepy to just stand there and watch something so massive burn, while I was standing there all alone. My husband and I were taking a camping road trip from San Francisco to Squamish, BC and back one summer. We camped a few nights at a small campground in the Mount Hood National Forest, and on one of the days we were in the area we decided to check out Portland. On our way back to the campground late that afternoon, we pulled up at a red light next to a motorcycle driven by a man, maybe in his 50s. His passenger on the back was a tall lanky woman around his age, and he was kind of a shorter guy with a mustache, and I remember telling my husband they reminded me of Boris and Natasha from Rocky and Bullwinkle. We noticed them staring at us, and then as the light changed, the guy gunned it and cut in front of us as the road narrowed from 2 lanes in each direction to 1. The light where we had seen them was the last town before the national forest, and the rest of the drive to the campground, about an hour, wove through cliffs and forest along the Clackamas River and crossed lots of charming old bridges. The sun was setting at this point, so the only people around were a few fishermen packing up to go home. We lost cell reception shortly after we got out of the last town. As we approached one of the bridges, we noticed the motorcycle and Boris and Natasha stopped dead center, across both lanes. As we got a little closer and were about to pass them, we realized there was smoke coming from their motorcycle. As we slowed down to pass them, we realized that whatever was smoking was something Natasha was holding in her hand, and right at that moment she tossed it under our car and the motorcycle pulled ahead and turned right into a side street, but then stopped, and they were both staring at our car waiting to see what would happen. My husband put his foot on the gas and we accelerated out of there in time for whatever it was to explode behind us, rather than under our car. The motorcycle sped off down the side road, and after flipping them the bird and cursing a bunch, we continued on ahead looking behind us the entire time. We ended up camping that night, although I couldn't sleep at all, waiting for them to come attack us in the night. We figured they were trying to disable our car to rob us, but who knows what their plans really were. Terrifying. My friend and I slowly drove by a car that was stopped at a stop sign one night. The dome light was on and all 4 passengers were sitting perfectly upright and staring straight forward, completely motionless with their eyes wide open. As we passed the car, nobody moved or acknowledged that we were staring at them, and as we continued down the road, the car remained in that exact spot until we lost visual of them. When I was leaving my friend's house about 5 or 6 hours later, I was continuing down a different road roughly about a half mile from where this strange occurrence happened, when I approached a car that was pulled over on the side of the road, headlights facing toward me. I slowed down and was going to see if they needed any help until I realized that it was the same car from earlier in the evening. All 4 passengers, like before, were sitting perfectly upright in their seats, staring straight forward with the dome light on, not acknowledging the fact that I was staring at them. I nearly came to a full stop as I was passing them until they all abruptly and in perfect unison all turned their heads and looked directly at me. It was at that moment that I got this rush of fear deep down in my bones, and I slammed on the gas and took off down the road. But their car once again didn't move an inch whatsoever. They never pursued me or anything. One of the most bizarre moments that I can recall. One night I was driving to a GF's house about 10 years ago. This was on the outskirts of Charleston, South Carolina. I lived about 20 miles from her, so the easiest route was down this long dark road that went past Magnolia Plantation. The road has no lights, or it didn't then, and is just a couple old plantations/tourist traps and thick trees on both sides. Also old decaying, abandoned houses back among the trees. I was driving and finally passed the sign for Magnolia and thought, good, I'm halfway there. Drove a bit more and once again, passed the same sign. It's a very obvious sign. Decided that if I passed the sign again I would pull over and alert the 911 operator that I seemed to be having a bit of an episode. Luckily I didn't pass it again. I hate that road though, it's just so dark and I swear I've seen people in the trees. And once a horse going down the road that disappeared. A few years ago, some friends and I went to a late movie in the city. Our town was too small to have a theater. We got out of the movie after midnight and got on the highway to drive home. It's a country highway, so it was pretty empty, and there was no one else on our side of the road. All of a sudden, there were lights right in front of us, headlights coming at us in our lane. No one had time to say or do anything, the other car was right there, maybe 3 seconds from contact. It passed through us. All 4 of us were silent for a few seconds. The ones who weren't driving turned around to look behind us. No lights behind, ahead, or around. We all kind of looked at each other and confirmed that there'd really been a car about to hit us. Everyone saw it. We told a few friends about it at school, and apparently there were other people who saw similar things on that highway. A few had stories of a car coming towards them. Needless to say, anytime we take that road at night, we're always on the lookout to see it again. A couple years back my brother, cousin, their girlfriends and I were going camping way out in the middle of eastern Washington. Far from civilization. Anyways, we had been driving all day and we're almost there, but it's really dark out, about 10 p.m. As we pull off the highway onto the side street towards the canyon, my cousin and I both are frozen staring out the passenger side windows at what appeared to be a tall man, 6 feet 6 inches, in a dark trench coat. One hand was grabbing his stomach over a tattered white t-shirt covered in blood and his other arm was pointing down the road towards the canyon. His face was completely in shadow and the top of his head was just nothing. No hair, not bald, but a solid We were too creeped out to go back and look, and the next day we went back and there was nothing similar along the road. This was in the middle of nowhere and at least 30 minutes from civilization, and it was rare to ever see other cars on that road. We still set up camp at night but made sure we had firearms within reach. This happened just a few weeks ago, in the middle of town on a bright afternoon. I was headed south on 40th and passed a pedestrian headed north. He and I nodded at each other in the typical southern greeting. He was very distinctive, short guy, big huge white beard, blue work pants and jacket, blue hat with red lettering. He was carrying a camo bag over his left shoulder and walking very slowly toward the local mission. I crossed over to 41st, went about 10 blocks south, going 25-30 mpg, hit all the lights green, which is almost impossible due to the timing, and stopped to buy smokes. I was in the gas station for less than a minute, no line, and they know me, so they grab my smokes when they see my car. As I got back in my car, I glanced across the street. Same pedestrian, again walking north slowly, but on 41st this time, same clothing and bag. He nodded at me again with a huge grin on his face. Somehow he got one street over and about 12 blocks ahead of me, even though I was driving and he was walking slowly in the opposite direction. Even if he'd gotten a ride, the distance should have been impossible in the time he had. Very weird. My time to shine. We drove through a time slip. We were driving back from Missouri on our way to Texas and were about an hour away from Joplin when we pull off for a pit stop and some gas. It was night in the middle of December. We got turned around, lost, and asked the station attendant how to get back to the freeway. He told us to keep on the road in front of the station and it will loop back around and meet up with the freeway. So we drive. Rural Oklahoma, dead of night, nothing around, no lights, no people. Nothing. Until the road opened up into the creepiest, deadest looking ghost town I've ever seen. All of a sudden every hair on my body stood up and I looked up. You felt that too? My husband said. I said, get us the hell out of here. And we haul ass. We could see the edge of the town up ahead, it was so tiny. But we drove like the devil himself was on our bumper. That town wasn't right. It was deserted and dead and decaying and completely terrifying. So we finally make it to the other side and it got even scarier. All that we saw were a black strip in front of us and huge, misty, green cornfields on either side of us. For miles. Now you might think, that's not weird. It's rural Oklahoma. Of course there would be cornfields. But like I said in the beginning, it was December. This corn was 10 feet high and green. We kept going. We had gone too far to turn back around and no way was I driving back through the murder ghost town. We eventually found the freeway. Got on it and reset the GPS. We had lost 3 hours. A week or so later, I looked up our route on Google Maps and found that road we drove down was a defunct part of what used to be Route 66. I'm convinced we drove through a time slip. Back in high school there was a haunted bridge nearby that my brother and I would take our female friends to, obviously to get a good scare out of them. The story went that there was a bus full of kids, the bus broke down on this bridge, which then collapsed and killed them all. The idea was to put baby powder on the trunk of your car, stop on the bridge and the kids would push your car across the bridge, and you could see their fingerprints in the baby powder. The bridge is located in a rural part of Texas, with a long dark road and a cemetery close to it. Now, I had done this plenty of times before, but this particular night we had 2 female friends who had never been. It was a cool, foggy night, so the windows fogged up pretty good. We go to the bridge, get pushed across by the kids like normal, the females are freaking out like normal. But on the way out we go past the cemetery and there's a guy there, just standing at the edge of the cemetery. Old like late 1800s farmer's clothes with a straw hat and a pitchfork, and a pale gray face. He just followed our car with his eyes as we drove by. At this point we're all freaking out, but here's the worst. When we get back to civilization, we get out of the car to look at the fingerprints on the back of the car. Amongst the fingerprints was written "Help me" in the baby powder, noped right out. This isn't paranormal, but it was strange and by far the weirdest thing that has happened to me. I wasn't driving, however, it was at night. I decided I would go for a jog and headed out of my house down the street. I passed by a woman who seemed distraught and she locked eyes as I ran past. I heard her say "excuse me," and normally I wouldn't stop, but it seemed late and unusual to see someone out on the street in my neighborhood at this time. I decided to stop and see what she wanted. She asked me where she was and how to get back to a different part of the city. I told her she was at least 30 minutes away from where she was trying to go. She seemed to be on the verge of tears and explained that she was left there by her husband after a night out. My red flags were going up, but I did feel like perhaps she was being genuine. She asked if there was some way I could help her or if I could drive her to the train or if I lived nearby. More red flags were going up. I told her that I didn't live nearby but I could wave or call down a taxi. In my head I was thinking if this was a trap I do not want her to know where I live. She seemed apprehensive to leave the spot as she claimed her husband might come back to get her. I phoned a taxi company and told them to come to the cross street we were at. After sticking around for a few minutes just talking to her trying to keep her calm, the taxi arrived. I helped her into it and told the driver to take her to her destination. She had told me an address, and then he would be paid when he reached the destination. I never heard anything of this woman again and have no idea what was the outcome. I like to think that perhaps I did some good rather than escaping a dangerous situation. This was about 12 to 13 years ago outside the Kissimmee area of Florida. My girlfriend and I like to drive around at night on the back roads trying to find cool or spooky places. We were going down a 2-lane road in a wooded area. We drove down about 5 miles and only saw a single other car. I was about to turn around when to my left I could make out a structure on a small hill illuminated by the moonlight. I slowed down and saw a small dirt road going towards the hill. I turned onto the road, which was rather bumpy. The road was surrounded by a field of long grass maybe 4 to 5 feet tall. I had an eclipse at the time so I really couldn't see over the grass. About 75 to 100 down the road, it curved sharp to the right. We couldn't see past the corner so I take the turn slowly. Directly in front of us were about 24 white crosses with balloons and stuffed animals strewn about like a roadside memorial. I immediately put it in reverse and got out of there. I wish I took down the address or remembered where we were. Didn't think about it much, but years later I really wanted to know more about the property, but I just don't remember where it was exactly, and the area has developed a lot since then. What was the memorial for? It couldn't have been a car accident since the memorial was so far away from the road. Plus I couldn't find any news articles about a dozen plus people dying in a single accident in the area.